You wake slowly, the sensation of being held by the shared sheets a comforting weight. The coolness against your cheek is subtle, noticeable only after several moments of stillness. You do not open your eyes immediately, letting the darkness cradle you in that liquid quiet of pre-dawn. There is only the rhythm of breath next to you, steady and deep, mixing with your own shallow inhalation. It is a sound more familiar than any spoken word, the slow, reliable cadence of shared existence. The air itself feels different at this hour, heavier and cooler than it will be by midday. You become aware of faint smells, the lingering sweetness of last night's wood smoke mixed with the sharper, clean scent of damp earth that has settled outside your small dwelling. The aroma hangs close to the low-beamed ceiling, a perfume unique to dwellings built close together. You realize you must move soon, and the slightest disturbance feels significant in this intense quiet. You begin to make yourself acutely aware of your body's weight, mapping every joint and limb. You shift minutely, enough to ease the pressure on one shoulder, taking care that the movement is absorbed entirely into the mattress, leaving no audible protest of springs or wood against wood. This practice of being exceptionally quiet becomes its own kind of meditation. Eventually, a faint sliver of gray light begins to seep through the oiled paper covering of the window pane. It does not rush in. Rather, it seems to gather itself slowly, diffusing through the paper until the room is washed in an even, pale luminescence that softens all edges and dampens any harsh contrast. The initial darkness gives way with remarkable gentleness. You rise from the sleeping space with deliberate slowness. Your bare feet meet the cool texture of packed earth just outside the threshold, a satisfying chill that wakes you entirely. You pause there for a moment, allowing your body to register the temperature change before moving further into the routine of the day. The weight of the air on your skin feels crisp and invigorating. The first task is often the ritual preparation for washing, an essential act of transition from rest to wakefulness. You carry yourself to the small basin area, perhaps a simple trough connected to a communal source. The water here is already cold, biting against your fingertips in a way that instantly sharpens the senses and seems to wash away any remaining vestiges of sleepiness. You scoop up water with a wooden bowl. It feels heavy and wonderfully frigid in your grasp. As you rinse your hands, concentrating on the feel of the grit-laced water passing over your palms, you become absorbed entirely in the simple sensation. You observe the way the cold makes your skin hairs prickle slightly, drawing all your attention to the meticulous action of washing. The basin area is close quarters, and you notice the patterns of other people already at work, a neighbor brushing their teeth with a twig, an older person methodically rinsing clothes. These silent co-occupants respect the rhythm of individual necessity. There are no hurried exchanges, only the shared understanding that this moment belongs to cleansing and preparation. When you finish washing, you feel physically lighter, as if the act itself has exfoliated away not just dust, but minor stiffnesses accumulated through the night's repose. You stand for a moment, letting the coolness of the air settle on your freshly washed skin. Outside, beyond the narrow mouth of the dwelling, life is beginning its quiet ascent. The first signs of the city are muted, a distant clanking sound that might be metal against stone, or perhaps the soft, rhythmic creak of an unseen cartwheel. You walk toward the edge of your immediate surroundings and pause. The air now carries distinct odors, not just damp earth, but something smokier, mixed with the faint, sweet tang of baking yeast already rising in a distant kitchen. It is the smell of preparation for life. You observe how the light outside has changed again. Where it was uniformly pale gray, thin shafts of watery gold are now angling between nearby buildings, catching the grime on brickwork and highlighting the deep shadows cast by wooden railings. The movement of people passing by remains subdued, a slow, deliberate unfolding. A few animals begin to stir in the cobbled thoroughfare, perhaps a donkey, moving with careful, ancient gait, or stray chickens scratching through detritus. You watch their movements, noting the efficient way they navigate the narrow space alongside human traffic. Your mind settles into an observational rhythm, linking the physical state of the surroundings to the time of day. The pre-dawn quiet was characterized by stillness and internal preparation. This emerging light signals that external routine is resuming its steady tempo. You do not hurry your pace or your thoughts. Each breath seems calibrated to match the slow awakening of the neighborhood. You notice details about the architecture, how the thick walls, designed for insulation against both scorching sun and bitter cold, retain a deep sense of history. The patterns etched into the stone steps and doorways speak silently of decades, perhaps centuries, of footsteps passing through exactly this space. You trace the cool lines of the mortar with your eyes, imagining every hand that had pressed those stones together long before you arrived. This slow observation becomes a form of quiet meditation itself, anchoring you gently in the present moment and rooting you into the flow of life around you. The necessity of rising with the light dictates a gentle readiness for the shared rhythm of the community, preparing your body and mind not for excitement, but for sustainable continuation. You are simply adjusting to the steady, low-key tempo of a city waking up, one stretch and one scent at a time. The warmth of the morning still clings to your skin, a residue from the close contact with others. You rise slowly, careful not to disrupt the gentle weight beside you. The air in the shared room is thick with the scent of cooling earth and residual wood smoke, mingled now faintly with the comforting sharpness of yeast and flour. Kneading dough requires a specific sort of bodily alignment, a steady effort that asks nothing dramatic but everything constant. You move toward the kneading area, where several others are already gathered, their movements forming an unspoken rhythm. You take your designated portion of the heavy, yielding sourdough mass. It has absorbed the cool night air and now holds the promise of warmth through human labor. The dough resists a little at first, then yields with a sighing elasticity under the pressure of your palms. As you begin to fold and push, the motion becomes meditative. You focus on the texture, feeling the way the gluten structure slowly develops beneath the layer of skin oil and muscle effort. Your hands move in predictable patterns, a push here, a turn there, a gentle folding back upon itself. It is a rhythm that quiets the mind while demanding physical presence. Sometimes you brush shoulders with your neighbor across the worn wooden trough, and the contact is simply part of the shared choreography of existence. Nothing needs to be said, and no glance needs to be exchanged for acknowledgement. Your concentration draws attention to the minute details, the way a few stray particles of flour catch the thin shafts of light filtering from the high window, making them shimmer like pale gold dust. You notice how these tiny specks hang suspended in the otherwise calm air, visible only when you pause your rhythmic work and simply breathe deeply. The ground beneath your knees is cool flagstone, contrasting with the deep residual warmth emanating from the communal hearth nearby, where embers still glow with a dull, steady promise of heat for the coming hours. Looking up, you see the smoke drifting lazily toward the roof beams, carrying away the day's residue, the faint odors of last night's cooking, the slight musk of sleeping bodies, and the crisp scent of morning coal dust. This act of kneading is more than simply preparing bread. It is a tangible continuation of sustenance, an acknowledgement that life requires daily labor to sustain its gentle rhythms. You lift your hands momentarily, feeling the cumulative ache in your palms, recognizing the subtle weariness etched into the lines of skin over years of necessary work. The deep scent of fermented grain settles around you, a primal smell associated with comfort and survival. Nearby, others are scraping tools against stone surfaces, the dull shush-thwack sound of knives being honed, or the soft tap-tup of small gourds being worked smooth. These sounds weave into the backdrop of your own steady kneading beat, creating a sonic blanket that defines this moment in time. You continue to work the dough, finding a deeper pool of focus. Your mind wanders away from the mechanics and drifts toward the simple realization of effort. Every meal, every bite of bread, required this slow, patient expenditure of energy shared among many hands. The weight of history feels not like a burden today, but rather a supportive rhythm, a set of established tasks that keep everyone gently tethered to the present moment. You observe the men and women working around you. They are all engaged in private conversations with their respective tasks, sharing space without needing deep connection, simply existing together in shared necessity. One woman near you shifts her stance, pulling a woven mat tighter beneath her feet as she settles into a longer kneading session. The quiet understanding that binds you is one of mutual dependence on the routine itself. When the dough finally reaches that perfect consistency, taut enough to hold its shape but still yielding under gentle pressure, you feel a satisfaction rooted in sheer completion, not accomplishment. You allow your shoulders to relax fully, noticing how the small release of tension feels after sustained concentration. The warmth from the ovens nearby seems to sink into your core, chasing away any last vestiges of the cool pre-dawn chill. This is the architecture of their cooperation: proximity without pressure, rhythm without urgency. Sometimes you find yourself observing the patterns created by the discarded flour on the stone floor, little scatterings that mark where hands have rested, a temporary geography of sustenance. You know that this shared labor defines more than just breakfast. It defines the slow, steady heartbeat of your community. As the morning progresses, the dough is eventually sectioned and allowed to rest in warming baskets, its surface developing a thin sheen of moisture. Your attention slows further, allowing you only to observe the subtle shifts in light, how the sun angle increases the contrast between the dull, matte brown of the raw dough and the polished gleam of the nearby wooden implements. The scent profile changes subtly too. The initial pungent smell of fresh yeast is layered with something drier, more caramelized, hinting at the eventual golden crust. You pause your hands over the now resting loaves, simply feeling the lingering warmth in the air pocket above them. You take a slow breath, letting the clean, slightly dusty aroma fill your lungs. This shared effort, this quiet politics of food preparation, binds you together with more resilience than any formal agreement could achieve. It is a foundational truth that survival is rhythmic and routine is the gentle structure of belonging. The feeling lingers in your joints and in the comforting exhaustion spreading through your arms. You feel connected to this stream of continuous, necessary work, recognizing yourself as one quiet thread woven into a strong communal textile. The wool of your tunic feels heavy, a solid weight against the skin that has grown accustomed to movement. You trace the texture where it meets the shoulder seam, noticing how the dye, a deep, muted indigo derived perhaps from local berries or roots, has settled into the fibers over many washings. It is not a bright color. Rather, it holds the depth of shadows and aged wood, suggesting permanence. Every piece of clothing you wear today carries the history of its making, the hands that spun the thread and the loom upon which it was stretched. You recall that simple fact. These garments are extensions of time itself. The outer cloak settles around you now, a thick sheath woven from darker, more resilient wool. As you adjust it, drawing the heavy lapels up slightly against the last vestiges of morning chill. You feel the reassuring drag of its weight across your arms. This is not mere covering. It is an affirmation of belonging and practicality. It speaks to an economy where nothing is wasted, every fiber accounted for, every seam reinforced with care. You move slowly toward a wooden hook set into the rough-hewn wall beside your sleeping space. Hanging nearby are other simple items. A small, curved basket whose woven fibers show areas of slight fraying. A sturdy piece of cured leather attached by thick stitching. And near them, a whetstone, its surface perpetually dusted with a fine silt of metal filings. As your fingertips brush against the cool, worn wood of the hook, you are acutely aware of the silence around these tools. They are quiet in their competence. The comb resting inside the basket speaks only of hair and routine. The whetstone whispers of careful preparation, of edges kept sharp for the day's necessary tasks. You pick up the small wooden comb first. It is carved simply, shaped from a piece of hardwood that has darkened to near black with age. Running it lightly through your own hair, you notice not just the texture, but the smooth, slight resistance of the wood itself, a coolness that seems timeless. You hold the comb for a moment, turning it over in your palm, contemplating how many hands have held this exact tool before yours. The weight of these outer garments and tools is strangely comforting. It grounds you not with labor, but with accumulated purpose. They are reminders of systems. The system of dyeing plants into color, the system of shaping wood against friction, the rhythm of a steady comb through tangled strands. You gather your belongings methodically, placing them back where they belong. Each small action is deliberate, a quiet conversation with material reality. The stone floor beneath your bare feet feels cool and irregular, slightly uneven underfoot from years of passage. You pause, feeling the subtle difference between the worn smoothness near the door and the more textured roughness further into the room. The world outside remains muffled by the remaining pre-dawn hush, but you feel a gentle pull toward the routine day demands. The thought drifts to how profoundly connected your ability to function today is to these few simple things. The thickness of this tunic, the sharpness of that blade edge, the reliable weight of your cloak. The passage into the new morning requires no sudden burst of energy or dramatic preparation. It simply asks for acknowledgement, an inventory of what you possess, physically and materially, and a quiet acceptance of its necessary use. You take one last deep breath in this cool, wood-smoke-tinged chamber, letting the density of the air settle around your lungs before stepping out into the emerging light. The marketplace this morning does not arrive with a sudden rush of noise. It unfolds like something slowly pulled open by gentle hands. You step from the narrow quiet of the street and into the initial breath of commerce. The air shifts immediately, gaining density. Before you, stacked crates hold vegetables, deep green cabbages, rough orange roots, peppers that look almost lacquered in the damp morning light. Your first sense to take note of is the scent. It is a layered aroma, complex and grounding. The sharp, metallic tang of brine from barrels near the corner mingles with the deep, loamy sweetness of hay stacked high on pallets. Underneath, those layers are the fainter notes, the smoky residue clinging to thick wool wraps, or perhaps the faint, sweet scent of spilled, fermented fruit juice drying into the dusty cobblestones. You walk slowly now, allowing your body to become an observer rather than a participant in the chaos. You do not rush toward any specific goods, but let the current of people guide you instead. The crowd is not aggressive. It moves with a studied grace, the rhythm dictated by the necessity of moving goods and meeting schedules. People brush past you, a gentle contact of woven linen or rough wool against your arm. You notice how each person carries their own unique ecosystem of belongings, a coil of thick rope draped over a shoulder, a sturdy wicker basket balanced easily on one hip, the gleaming brass handles of simple cooking pots tethered to a pole. Your attention is drawn sideways, toward the edges of the main thoroughfare. There, a man sits cross-legged beside a pile of fragrant herbs. He does not call out, he merely waits. You observe the way the morning light catches the dust motes swirling around his collection, the dull green of dried sage, the dusty violet of lavender, and bundles of bright yellow chamomile tied with twine. His presence is quiet, an anchor in the background noise. The soundscape itself demands close attention. It is not simply loud, it is varied. There are high, rhythmic calls that ascend above the general hum, the cry of a seller advertising fish from deep wooden trays, and the counterpoint of a low, guttural chant accompanying a wheeled cart struggling uphill. Amidst these louder sounds, you hear the quieter noises, the soft thump-scrape of sackcloth being moved across stone, the occasional clink of earthenware pottery, the muted jangle of coins exchanged over an open cloth. These small details give structure to the larger noise. You find yourself pausing near a spice stall. The merchant is arranging small piles of colored powder, saffron, paprika, perhaps ground cumin. You lean in slightly, resisting the urge to simply look at the bright colors. Instead, you study the way the powders catch the faint morning light. They seem impossibly fine, almost dusty magic. Observing this tiny mound, you consider the sheer journey these things must have taken, dried by sun and salt in distant lands, carried across rough seas, ground by stone mills until they became these delicate shades. It feels like holding a map of many far-off places in your open palm. The textiles stalls are next. Bolts of woven wool and sturdy linen are stacked high. You do not examine the price or the pattern. You study the materials themselves. The way the light absorbs into the natural fibers, darkening the reds and softening the blues. Some cloths bear a history etched into their very weave, a tiny patch mended by hand decades ago, visible only if you pause long enough to look closely. These garments feel more like records of life than mere coverings. The passage through the market is an exercise in quiet observation of human endurance. You watch the movement patterns, how a woman with two heavy baskets moves her arms rhythmically to counterbalance their weight, how old men lean heavily on canes, their pace slow but deliberate, weaving expertly between faster-moving shoppers, or how children dart and weave through the legs of adults, operating entirely outside the established flow. These movements suggest an understanding of the space, a kind of unwritten geography. Everyone knows which path is most efficient, which bottleneck to avoid, and where to pause for breath. The market functions not just because of commerce, but because of this inherited knowledge, a communal fluency in moving through bodies and stalls. As you continue your quiet traverse, the focus shifts from the visible goods to the subtle rhythms of interaction. You pass a baker kneading dough near his stall. He wipes flour from his cheek with an expression that is entirely content, finding satisfaction in the tactile repetition of the action. Nearby, two men are arguing over the optimal method for securing their cart wheels. Their gestures are dramatic and physical, yet the disagreement seems rooted in a shared history of knowing what works on these rough, cobbled streets. The cumulative effect of this passage is not one of excitement, but deep saturation. You absorb the textures, the grit under your worn sandals, the slightly sticky residue near fresh fruit stands, the cool dampness that occasionally brushes up from the stone foundations. You notice how the smell of sweet spices competes with the strong undertone of wood smoke and human sweat, how these disparate scents do not clash, but instead build a unique, recognizable olfactory signature of early morning life here. You realize that this marketplace is more than a place to trade bread or olives. It is an enormous mechanism for maintaining the rhythm of belonging. Every whisper exchanged over a transaction, every deliberate sidestep around a cartwheel, contributes to the smooth operation of the community. You are merely a current running through a vital stream. The energy you absorb is not exhilarating. It is steady and sustaining, like the gradual heating of stone under a midday sun. After drifting through the busiest sections, your pace slows naturally as you move toward the slightly quieter periphery where smaller vendors, those who specialize in niche crafts or rare seeds, have set up. Here, the chatter lowers to murmurs, more intimate and personal. You observe a seamstress working by a folding stool, her needle flashing rhythmically. Her concentration seems total, shutting out the cacophony of goods and hurried footsteps surrounding her. You watch the single loop of thread as it passes through the fabric, a tiny act that speaks volumes about patience and dedication. The marketplace, when viewed through this slow lens of observation, becomes a powerful display of patterned existence, a beautiful, necessary ballet performed daily in the open air. You carry the weight of all these sensory impressions with you, the sharp snap of dried thyme, the grit of cinnamon under your shoe, the muffled sound of water sloshing from a vendor's bucket. It settles into the quiet landscape of your awareness, preparing you for the focused labor that awaits beyond its walls. The rhythmic action of your hands guides the wood shavings into neat, shallow piles. You are focused on smoothing the surface, coaxing out a perfect curve from the piece of scavenged timber that rests before you. The scent of pine sap, newly exposed by the blade, rises faintly in the cool morning air. It is a clean, sharp smell that speaks of forest and deep time. The wood beneath your fingers has taken on an almost liquid warmth. You notice the grain pattern so clearly, darker streaks running parallel to lighter bands, like rivers across a map. Each twist and turn in this natural record tells you something about its life before it reached this workshop, suggesting storms or slow, steady growth. Your movements are economical, practiced by habit rather than conscious thought. The rasping sound of the curved plane against the wood is a gentle, predictable music. It anchors your attention completely. You find yourself breathing in sync with the labor, each breath shallow and even, matching the measured strokes of the tool. This feeling of deep engagement is settling into you, a quiet state where time seems to fold away its edges. You look up briefly, letting your eyes adjust to the mottled light filtering through the high workshop window. Dust motes dance sluggishly in these shafts of illumination, suspended in beams like tiny golden spirits. They move without purpose, simply carried by the air currents that flow through the open doorway, reminding you of the invisible architecture of this space. The simple materials surrounding your task, the block of timber, the sharpening stone worn smooth by generations of use, the pile of shavings, all contribute to a singular quietude. Everything here has its specific place and purpose. Nothing is left carelessly scattered. This careful arrangement speaks volumes about the necessity of order in life. You shift slightly on your stool, feeling the cool, polished wood against your trousers. The slight give and solid resistance beneath you are grounding. Your muscles recall the motions automatically. You remember that this physical process is not simply an act of creation. It is a way to maintain connection with the durable rhythms of existence. The workshop itself smells layered. There is the initial sharp scent of cut wood, underlaid by the dry, earthy smell of sawdust and the faint, mineral tang left from wiping down tools. This complex combination of scents feels like the very signature of steady work. You pick up a piece of sandpaper, its grit feeling coarse and resolute beneath your thumb. You begin lightly dragging it across an area that needs final refinement. The friction creates a minute heat against your skin, a gentle reminder of energy being converted into form. This small interaction, skin meeting grain, is surprisingly tactile. As you smooth the wood further, your mind begins to wander just slightly, drifting away from the curve in front of you. You consider how many hands have held this tool before yours, how many such pieces were made, each intended for a specific use. A handle, perhaps, or a small box lid. The deep satisfaction that comes with manual labor is not loud or dramatic. It is a quiet hum, a steady warmth in your chest, born from the direct correlation between effort and visible result. This feeling of purposeful action washes over you, allowing the subtle anxieties of life to dissipate into the rhythmic sweep of the plane. You pause again, resting one hand lightly on the finished curve. Its weight feels solid, true. The geometry of this simple object, the perfect arc, the flat planes meeting at precise angles, is a study in necessary simplicity. Looking out through the doorway, you see the sun climbing higher now, casting sharper shadows that define the corrugated iron roof and the uneven cobblestones outside. The market's initial cacophony has softened into a steady background murmur, like water running over river stones, a constant, low undertow of human activity. The time spent here, within this narrow space defined by timber and tool, serves to recalibrate your sense of self within the wider community. Your identity today is wrapped up in the capacity for sustained focus, the quiet competence derived from turning raw material into something useful. It is an anchoring process, allowing you to feel firmly rooted in the present moment. Another piece of wood rests on the bench, waiting its turn. You gather a clean cloth and wipe down your tools, the action itself meditative. The metal becomes cool and dark beneath your touch. The routine of cleaning solidifies the rhythm of the day. With steady breaths, you accept this pattern. Labor, observation, rest, then repetition. This simple cycle is the fundamental machinery by which life here continues to turn smoothly, gently. The light begins shifting again, entering the workshop not in beams, but in a broader wash of paler gold. The air feels warmer now, thicker with the mingled smells of wood dust and human industry. Your labor has helped to draw out the best qualities of the material, just as the shared rhythm of this community draws forth its quiet strength from every member. You finish the final pass on the piece, feeling a deep resonance of completion settle in your bones, preparing you for the gentle flow of time that follows. The steady warmth of the day has settled into a soft rhythm, but you do not yet feel fully rested. It is that time when the community seeks replenishment after labor and connection, the ritual gathering near the water basin. You follow the familiar path toward the public fountain, your movements unhurried by any sense of urgency. The air here feels distinctly cooler than the sun-baked stones surrounding it, drawing you forward like a physical relief. As you approach the wide, stone lip of the cistern, the sounds shift. They are no longer dominated by the quick bustle of trade or the deep sounds of carpentry. Instead, they blend into a softer symphony. The rhythmic splash of water-filling vessels, the quiet murmur of voices that overlap and dissipate like steam on cool air. You do not rush to scoop your own container. Instead, you pause slightly at the periphery, becoming an observer in this flow of passing needs. The stone steps leading down to the basin are uneven underfoot, worn smooth by generations of careful weight and repeated footsteps. Running your fingertips lightly over the cool surface, you feel the faint grit mixed with the deep polish of use, a texture that tells a silent story far longer than any individual life. You watch as others draw water, some moving with practiced efficiency, buckets dipping and lifting without effort, others pausing near the edge, staring into the depth of the basin's cool reflection, as if searching for something unseen. The light striking the wet stone is brightest here, catching every tiny droplet like scattered glass beads, emphasizing the necessary utility of this place. You finally draw your own modest clay container from the ground cloth slung over your arm. Kneeling down carefully so as not to disturb the steady line of people forming near the edge, you position it beneath the gentle stream where water trickles out of a carved spout high above. The immediate sensation is one of profound coolness. The coldness travels up your forearms and settles into your bones, washing away some of the lingering warmth left by the midday sun. As you wait for the container to fill, your gaze drifts across the gathered group. They are mostly strangers, linked only by this shared point of necessity. There is a palpable atmosphere of polite cohabitation, where privacy is momentarily suspended for the sake of collective function. A small child drops a smooth, unremarkable stone into the basin, and the little plink echoes momentarily, drawing an amused glance from an elderly woman who is standing beside you. She wears simple, dark linens that seem to absorb light, lending her an air of quiet antiquity. She is inspecting your empty receptacle, as if judging its suitability for water carrying. You simply nod in acknowledgement, returning the observation with a slight downturn of your mouth, a recognition of their silent, mutual communication. The interaction requires no words. It relies solely on shared presence and understanding. The conversation nearby weaves itself around familiar topics: the rain predicted for the week to come, the price of grain in the lower district, the health of a neighbor's small garden plot. You do not follow any one thread entirely, but rather absorb the cadence, the lift and fall of voices, the quickened pace when an exciting piece of gossip is shared, the calming drawl of advice given with careful patience. These snippets are not dramatic events. They are simply the connective tissue of a living community, showing how easily conversation can become ritualistic itself. When your container feels adequately heavy, you rise slowly, lifting it carefully to your waist. The journey back requires navigating around bundled baskets and slower-moving citizens. You pass by an open stall where spices, cinnamon sticks, deep red paprika, powdered turmeric, are meticulously piled high on woven mats, the dry, pungent perfumes mixing with the fresh scent of earth stirred up by passing feet. These smells are immediate and grounding, connecting you to a global trade even within this small corner of town. You take a moment upon your return toward the quiet thoroughfare to simply stand and breathe in the mixture of aromas: the cool mineral scent of the fountain water, the dry musk of damp wool, the sweet sharpness of crushed herbs. This pause is necessary. It allows you to mentally catalog the day's encounters. It reminds you that life moves forward not through grand gestures or singular achievements, but through a million small exchanges. A glance shared across a crowd, a quiet comment left hanging in the cool air, the gentle cooperation required when drawing water from a shared resource. This transient nature of connection is perhaps its greatest gift. It requires nothing profound, demanding no deep emotional investment, yet it offers sufficient moments of human warmth to sustain the spirit for the days ahead. You realize that these brief encounters are what weave the fabric of daily life. They are the acknowledgments of mutual need and shared geography. Leaving the coolness of the fountain area, you carry with you not just water, but a quiet sense of having been part of something cyclical, something continuous, flowing like the water itself through the ancient stone basin. The sun, having climbed to its peak of power, now begins the slow arc of recession. You feel the weight of the midday heat settling over you, a thick blanket woven from stone and dusty air. The energy that defined the morning's work seems to have drained away into the shimmering heat haze rising off the cobbles. Everything slows down. There is an ancient rhythm to this pause, one dictated not by clocks, but by the passage of temperature itself. You instinctively turn, seeking a patch where the architecture has kept the fierce overhead light at bay. A deep-set archway, formed perhaps by centuries of supporting structures above you, offers just enough relief. You move quietly, settling into the cool shade beneath the stone vaulting. The transition from the sharp edges of the illuminated streets to this pooled coolness is immediate and profound. The first thing your senses register is the quality of the air. It feels less like heat and more like density. It holds a particular scent, a complex mix that speaks of settled dust, baked earth, and perhaps the fainter, sharper notes of spilled oils from a nearby cartwheel. You notice how the light itself behaves here. It does not strike directly, but seems to filter in, milky and diffuse, illuminating the textured surface of the worn stone wall beside you. Looking at the ground, you observe the uneven geometry of the paving stones, each one settled into its neighbor with a careful permanence that speaks only of time and necessary weight. A lizard, small and sun-dazed, shifts its coloration along the grout lines between two larger flagstones, a minute piece of life moving in slow motion under the oppressive lull. You settle yourself against the coolness of the wall, allowing your body to adjust to the temperature drop. The silence here is not empty. It is saturated with sound, the low thrumming background symphony of a city resting. You hear the occasional, rhythmic drip from an unseen eave overhead, marking time with deliberate regularity. This steady drip becomes an unintentional metronome for your thoughts, forcing a slower pace upon your internal landscape. Nearby, there might be the faint, distant jingle of metal wheels on stone, or perhaps the muffled call of a vendor who is working only for those near enough to hear his low voice through the oppressive quiet. It draws your attention to how light interacts with shadow. You watch as shadows from structures across the way, a jutting drain pipe, a corner column, the lip of the arch itself, stretch and contract imperceptibly over time. They do not stay fixed. They pulse, elongating slightly as the sun creeps higher, only to retreat and sharpen again as the angle shifts marginally. This constant, gentle dance between illumination and absence becomes your focus. You realize that watching these shadows is an act of quiet meditation, requiring nothing more than stillness. It teaches you about permanence and change in equal measure. Your gaze drifts across a nearby basin, or perhaps just along the stretch of stone where water might collect. You notice the marks left on the masonry, deep gouges from ancient tools, faint stains of mineral runoff, and the smoother wear patterns where countless hands have rested their forearms throughout generations. These physical signs are silent records. They whisper stories without needing words. Each scratch tells you something about labor, survival, and repeated human contact with this very spot. Reflecting on this stillness brings a necessary slowness to your mind. The great rush of the morning's necessity, the kneading, the market clamor, the focused effort in the workshop, has passed, leaving behind this profound quietude. You realize that the rhythm of life here does not demand constant movement. It includes long, deep pauses, periods where one is simply permitted to exist within the atmosphere. To wait for the afternoon shade is a necessary part of living in a hot climate, but it also becomes an opportunity for the mind to process. It allows you to breathe deeply and observe your own settled breath against the cool stone. You shift slightly, finding a more comfortable angle, allowing the weight of your limbs to settle fully into repose. The aroma changes subtly as the hours pass. The initial dustiness gives way to something warmer, carrying hints of dried herbs bundled and tied somewhere nearby, perhaps mixed with the musky scent of livestock that move through the deeper lanes of the town. You consider how everything, the people, the buildings, the routine itself, seems profoundly connected by this shared need for rest during the midday blaze. The heat is still palpable beneath the cool pocket of shade. It radiates up from the stones and through the clothing you wear. You allow your awareness to expand outward, noting not just what you see or hear, but the overall feeling of being enveloped by the place. The quiet here seems almost a protective cloak itself, muffling minor anxieties and forcing attention back onto fundamental sensory data. The slight grit underfoot if you were to move, the gentle pressure of the stone against your back, the slow drip from above. There is a philosophical weight in these midday moments. You reflect on the concept of time itself, how it does not rush through this shade. It pools here, thick and slow like warm honey. This stillness forces you to inhabit the moment fully, observing the tiny adjustments of your own body, the minuscule settling dust motes dancing visible columns of light when a stray shaft manages to penetrate the archway. These moments underline that community life is not just defined by its busy peaks, but equally by these necessary troughs, these respites where observation becomes the main form of labor itself. You sit at the low, sturdy table, the wood worn smooth and dark beneath your fingertips. It is not a grand meal, nor an event to be noted on any calendar of importance. Simply, it is sustenance, a period of quiet fullness that settles deep into your bones. The light filtering in from the small window catches dust motes suspended above the linen cloths, making them appear like slow, golden rain. The bread before you rests cool and substantial. You trace the jagged score marks across the crust with a careful finger. It has traveled far, even if only through the local ovens. It carries the faint, ghost scent of smoke and yeast, mixed with the deeper, unmistakable aroma of sun-baked grain. This bread is not merely carbohydrate, but a measure of time, of hands working rhythmically under a steady sky. Next to the loaves are simple wooden bowls. In one, there is a scattering of oily, dark olives, already split open, and alongside them, small mounds of chopped herbs, rosemary, maybe thyme, mixed with something faintly purple you recognize as wild oregano. These elements seem almost too perfect for mere coincidence. They whisper of morning foraging or careful preparation. The wine is poured into plain earthenware jugs. It has the deep ruby hue of stained Twilight and carries a gentle warmth even in this cool air. As you lift the bread, its heft noticeable. You break off a corner piece. The crust gives way with a soft, satisfying resistance, crumbling slightly into fine, pale flakes that settle on your palm. You bring the bread to your mouth, and the taste is immediate, deep earthiness meeting a slight bitterness from the char of the crust. It is a grounding flavor, requiring no sudden jolts or unexpected intensity, just presence. You take a small bite, focusing entirely on the texture of the crumb, how it yields easily, but retains a satisfying chew near its center. Each chew requires you to slow your breathing, matching the quiet rhythm established by the bread itself. The accompanying cheese is wrapped in thick leaves, giving off an intermittent musk of damp earth and clean foliage. You tear away a small piece with your fingers. The process feels tactile and ancient. The cheese inside is soft, holding the slight saltiness of mineral runoff, mingling its rich umami notes with the sharp perfume of the wild herbs. This combination speaks less of culinary artistry and more of profound local knowledge, knowing which plant thrives when, and what element complements another in the quiet cycle of growth. You dip a corner piece of bread into the small bowl of olive oil and crushed herbs. The mix is an immediate eruption of contrasting sensations. The sharp, peppery bite of good olives against the warm, nutty comfort of the olive oil. It forces your focus to narrow down to just this single moment, the light glinting off the oil's surface, the satisfying crunch as you bite into the bread-herb mixture. You notice how these simple elements, taken together, create a tapestry of sufficiency. There is no extravagance here, yet there is an overwhelming completeness. The meal whispers that true nourishment does not come from abundance or novelty, but from reliable cycles, the sun warming the field, the hands grinding the grain, the earth providing its bounty. The process slows down further as you sip the wine. It warms your throat gently, a liquid reminder of the life flowing through the surrounding community. You watch the way the simple wooden spoon catches the faint light reflection on the table's surface, detailing years of use and passing meals. The rhythm established by eating is fundamentally meditative. It asks nothing of your intellect, but rewards your awareness. Around you, others are beginning to rise in their own cycles of quiet digestion. There is the soft clink of pottery as someone washes a used bowl nearby, a sound that blends seamlessly into the background hum of life, continuing its steady pace. You feel connected to this periphery, the shared act of refueling, of absorbing energy for the demands of another day's rhythm. Your thoughts drift back to the origin of these tastes and smells. The wheat must have been harvested when the moon was at its highest. The olives required a specific Mediterranean warmth to ripen. These flavors are not isolated occurrences. They are threads woven into the very fabric of your place, anchored by generations who learned simply how to survive well. You do not think of this as history, but rather as an ongoing condition, a state of being maintained through mindful consumption. The meal encourages a slowing down that goes beyond mere digestive slowness. It is a physical act that enforces mental quietude. When you are intensely focused on the precise interplay between salt and mild sweetness, the larger anxieties of the world recede, replaced by the immediate task at hand, chewing slowly, appreciating deeply. After the main portions have been consumed, there is a settling in of satisfaction. You gather the stray crusts and remnants, noticing how quickly they become part of the day's detritus, a quiet circle of consumption returning to itself. The energy that remains is gentle, warm, and ready for continuation without haste. The sensory memory of this meal will persist long after the plates are cleared. The grit of the flour dust still on your fingers, the cool taste of the salt-cured cheese contrasting with the earthy bread, the liquid warmth lingering in your chest. It is a powerful reminder that life's quiet constants, good bread, clean water, local produce, form the most reliable and enduring foundations for any kind of existence. The late afternoon sun does not arrive with a sudden burst. Rather, it seems to seep into the communal spaces, mellowing and thickening until it is spun gold. You find yourself near the edge of a minor plaza, a space dedicated not to grand commerce, but simply to being. A quiet intersection where the daily movements of life converge and pass through each other. The air here holds a specific scent, a composite perfume of dust settled on warm stone, faint wood smoke lingering from earlier fires, and the subtle sweetness carried by passers-by, perhaps dried figs or baked bread. You slow your pace as you enter this transitional space. It is not the organized bustle of the market, nor the focused effort of the workshop. It is a gathering of ends and beginnings. You watch the flow of people, observing how they move through the plazas as if following invisible currents of routine. Some carry empty baskets swinging gently against their hips, suggesting errands are complete for the day, returning to the simple weight of home. Others walk with purpose, leaning on staffs that have accompanied them across many seasons. Your attention drifts to the sounds. They are not the loud cries of vendors, but a layered tapestry of quieter noises. The soft, rhythmic thudding of leather soles on packed earth, the occasional, melodic burst of children's laughter played out near an archway, and the low murmur of adult conversations, pitched just above the level of comfortable silence. These sounds weave together, forming the very rhythm of the settlement. You observe a group of young people gathered near what might have been a fountain basin earlier in the day. They are engaged in a game that requires little more than 3 smooth, river-worn stones and an understanding of passing time. Their movements are fluid and unhurried, interspersed with bursts of sudden energy, yet even their play seems governed by the predictable constraints of shared space. This observation brings you to consider pattern recognition, the subtle choreography of community life. Notice how one mother pauses her steps slightly when she sees another woman approaching the same stretch of path, creating a momentary acknowledgement that needs no spoken word. It is simply an adjustment of bearing, a courteous recalibration of shared space. As you walk slowly past the main residential buildings, you take note of their architecture in late daylight. The ochre plaster walls catch the sun unevenly, throwing deep, defined shadows that shorten and lengthen with painstaking slowness across the dusty pavement. You see how the houses are built close together, utilizing every available square meter, yet somehow maintaining a sense of separation. Each doorway marking not just an entrance, but a boundary between private life and the communal rhythm. The light is reaching its zenith of transition now. The hard heat of midday has softened into something palpable, almost golden enough to cup in your hands. You notice that even mundane objects seem imbued with this warm glow. The dark patina on the wooden window frames, the flecks of mica caught in a dry wall, the rich, deep brown of stacked firewood against a cool stone base. Near a vendor setting up his evening wares, perhaps small pottery or bundles of colored thread, you slow down again. The man arranges his goods methodically, wiping the dust from each piece with practiced care. You observe the simple economy of his labor. He does not need to shout or argue. His routine of arranging and perfecting quietly informs others that trade is open for another cycle. This entire stretch of passing through communal spaces teaches a quiet lesson in endurance. It demonstrates how life organizes itself around necessary movements. The passage from labor back to rest, the movement of goods between hands, the natural trajectory of children's play. These routines are not merely habits. They are the very sinews that keep the community breathing. You feel the steady, cumulative effect of these observations on your own sense of time. It is a rhythm distinct from the measured ticks of a clock or the rapid pace of far-off cities. This is the deep, organic tempo of settlement life, an ebb and flow defined by sunlight, necessity, and polite adjacency. The air itself feels thicker now, heavier with the residue of the day's collective existence. It carries the combined sense of spices warming in cloth bags, wood dust, sun-baked earth, and human activity. You find a corner niche that offers partial shade and simply rest your hands on the cool stone surface for a long moment. You let your awareness settle into this gentle continuation, allowing yourself to absorb the ambient hum of low conversation, the faraway sound of metal hitting metal, the collective breathing rhythm of dozens of lives unfolding around you. This slow immersion in shared space is its own quiet discipline, anchoring you deeply within the current of history and human proximity. The afternoon's rhythm has softened into a deeper, quieter cadence. You find yourself walking through the main thoroughfare again, but the purposeful haste of the day has bled away with the declining sun. The air, which held the accumulated warmth and dust of activity, now feels distinctly different, a gentle cooling embrace that touches your arms and brushes against the back of your neck. Look closely at the light bathing the street. It is no longer the harsh, vertical clarity of midday, but something elongated and buttery, stained with shades of burnt ochre and deep rose. You feel the contrast keenly on your skin. The residual heat stored in the stone steps gives way to a refreshing coolness that seems to rise up from the deeper shadows pooling beneath the eaves. You notice how the light performs its slow magic across the worn flagstones. Each irregularity, every faint chip or groove carved by centuries of feet, is suddenly highlighted in warm gold tones. The colors on the buildings seem richer now, the deep terracotta of painted plaster, the bruised blue-gray of weathered slate roofs. It changes everything about the scale and texture you observed earlier. The town does not simply exist under this light, it seems to be washed clean by it. The pedestrian flow has transformed entirely. Where moments ago there was a quick current of passing bodies, the sharp heel clicks and brief bursts of chatter, there is now a more deliberate tempo. People move with an unhurried grace that speaks of the day's work concluded, a gradual shedding of obligation. Some walk side by side, perhaps touching shoulders lightly as they talk in low murmurs. Others stroll alone, their pace seeming to measure the fading light rather than any destination. You observe these slower walks and find a calming rhythm settling into your own steps. As you pass the small stalls that were set up earlier, many are now being dismantled. A merchant rolls up his brightly striped awning with slow, careful movements. Another gathers bundles of unsold goods into rough sacks. The actions feel ritualistic, almost graceful in their necessity. You pause by a corner dwelling where fresh laundry has been hung on low lines between two stone walls. The fabric catches the deepening twilight, transforming from dull white to shades of pale lavender and muted yellow as the light filters through it. It is an everyday sight, yet under this specific colored sky, it seems intensely beautiful, anchoring you to the enduring patterns of simple life. You walk past a seamstress's small doorway. The scent of linen mixed with a faint whiff of dried olive leaves drifts out. She sits low at her wooden table, perhaps completing a repair or simply waiting. Her movements are slow and economical. She does not rush through the delicate work because there is nowhere else to be, nor any urgent need. The air carries new smells now that the intensity of the day's commerce has waned. The sharp tang of spices gives way to the cleaner scent of cooling stone, and the faint, sweet smell of dinner cooking, maybe woodsmoke mingling with herbs from a hearth fire. These aromas are whispers of replenishment, signaling the closing of the working cycle. You realize that this twilight transition is more than just a shift in color. It is a temporal slowing down, a natural breath taken by the community after its exertion. The energy becomes less about forward movement and more about containment, the gathering inward toward the warmth and the hearth. It feels like everyone instinctively knows when to start winding down. The sounds also adjust. The sudden shouts have softened into murmurs, punctuated by the occasional gentle clanging of a kitchen pail, or the soft murmur of conversation spilling out from open doorways. You listen to these low frequencies, finding them profoundly restful compared to the jarring chorus of midday. These are the sounds of settling in. The residential streets, narrow and winding, become quieter passages now that the main plaza is emptying. The houses press close together, their thick walls absorbing sound and heat alike. Walking through this architecture, you observe how history seems baked into every corner. You notice small details, a child's discarded wooden toy near a doorstep, ivy creeping determinedly up a mortar line, the way rainwater pools temporarily in the dips of the paving stones. You feel an increased attention to detail, compelled by the dwindling light to see what remains visible. The deep indigo that is beginning to stain the high parts of the sky contrasts strikingly with the last vestiges of orange clinging to the western horizon. This gradient of color feels immense and deeply calming. It suggests a vast continuity. The cycle will repeat itself, regardless of how transient any single moment seems. As you walk these streets, your steps become more meditative, finding their own steady rhythm that matches the slowing pulse of the neighborhood. You are moving through a community engaged in its nightly ritual of decompression. There is no drama here, only the quiet assurance of shared routine. It is a profound comfort to witness life adhering so reliably to time's cycles. The light finally begins to soften toward a muted purple haze. The shadows lengthen and merge, losing their sharp definition into broader pools of color on the ground. This fading luminescence seems to encourage reflection, encouraging you to slow your breathing slightly, too. You feel the weight lift from your shoulders that the day's minor tasks had accumulated. You are becoming attuned to this gentle descending tempo, realizing that the profound structure of life here is not built upon grand gestures or sudden changes, but on these reliable, repeating transitions. From bright dawn to busy noon, and now, settling into the deep peace of twilight, the dust of the day, a subtle coating that adheres to everything, to your woolen cloak, to the tips of your fingers, even seeming to settle into the creases of your skin. You feel an undeniable call toward the cleansing ritual, not out of necessity alone, but as a kind of natural winding down, a physical marking of transition from activity to repose. The sounds of the street have softened significantly. The hurried cries and clatter of the market are replaced by a muted background hum, the steady drip from a roof eave, the low creak of some distant gate, the rhythmic call of an animal settled for the night. You move back towards the dwelling, your steps now imbued with a slower, more measured pace than the day's urgency demanded. The air here is noticeably cooler than it was at midday, carrying the blended sense of banked cooking fires and cooling stone. It is the smell of domestic quietude settling over the town. You reach the wash basin area, perhaps an open courtyard corner or a designated stream-fed trough. Here, the focus narrows entirely to the water. The coolness hits your exposed skin immediately, a shock that instantly wakes tired muscle and slows any residual internal heat. You gather the water. It is clear, drawn fresh from the source, carrying with it the mineral scent of the deep earth. You begin the careful process of washing. First, the hands. They are stiffened by handling rough fibers, smoothing wood, and scooping dry goods all day. You rub your palms together under the cool stream, watching the water run over them. The sensation is deeply grounding. It pulls the attention down to the immediate point of contact, the slickness of wet skin against the resistance of the current. You notice the grain on your knuckles, perhaps a minor abrasion from yesterday's labor, each imperfection washing away along with the detritus of the day. Next, you attend to the tools and garments. The rough wooden handles of baskets, the fine charcoal dust clinging to fingertips. Each object needs tending if it is to participate in tomorrow's cycle. You dip a piece of cloth into the basin, rinsing grit from the whetstone and wiping down the smooth planes of wood that marked your hands this morning. This act of washing tools feels strangely like caring for the community itself. Every cleaned implement speaks to the expectation of continuity. As you wash, your gaze drifts up, taking in the textures surrounding you. The mortar stones, pitted and softened by centuries of use, stand beside newer structures, evidence of constant repair and adaptation. You notice how the light, which was harsh and vertical at noon, now falls obliquely, catching dust motes that float listlessly on the evening air, making them momentarily visible particles of time suspended in stillness. The residual scent of soap or lye, perhaps used for cleaning cloth, mingles with the sharper, comforting smell of wood smoke drifting from a nearby chimney. It is a complicated perfume, an olfactory map of communal life. There is a particular kind of quiet here, not the silence of emptiness, but the profound accumulation of soft sounds. The gentle slosh of water against stone, the whispery scrape of cloth on dry flagstone, perhaps the low murmuring voice of a neighbor passing by who does not stop to converse. You are immersed in this rhythm of purification. It is more than simply hygiene. It is a psychological shedding. The day's minor irritations, the physical tensions accumulated from bending and lifting, seem to dissolve with the flow of water. Your shoulders drop slightly as you breathe deeper, allowing the cool air to fill lungs that have been occupied by dust, spices, and sweat. You turn your attention inward to your clothes themselves. The tunic feels heavy now, dampening into the cloth fibers. You rinse it slowly, considering its weight and resilience. It is a simple piece of material, yet it has carried you through hours of varying activity, from kneeling by the trough to standing in the low light of evening. You observe how the dye holds up, a steady, reliable color against the natural wear. This cloth tells a story of use, not necessarily of splendor or difficulty, but simply of constant participation. The washing process forces a deceleration that is almost meditative. You are forced to slow down enough to register the subtle differences in temperature, the brisk cold from the runoff compared to the slightly warmer dampness trapped near your skin. The care you give to these simple articles reinforces a deeper sense of respectful duty toward all things, both personal and communal. Everything here has value if it is maintained. Nothing belongs permanently to one person or one time. You finish washing, feeling noticeably lighter, less burdened by the invisible grit and minor stresses of the day. You hang your clean garments carefully, letting them drip slightly in the cooling air, perhaps allowing them a small moment to dry under the emerging star glow. The physical act feels like a kind of ritual closing ceremony for the day's lived experience. Leaving the washing area, you notice the subtle changes taking place on the town itself. The lamps are being lit now, not with a sudden blaze, but with careful dips of flint and tinder, casting pools of buttery, yellow light that push back the deepest indigo shadows. This emerging luminescence does not erase the dark. Rather, it defines it, making the architecture visible in soft relief. You pass by closed wooden shutters, each slat seeming to hold the memory of daylight sounds. The scent of cooking oil from dinner preparation replaces the sharp spice aromas. The echoes of labor are replaced by low voices and the scraping sounds of evening preparations. You take a moment to simply watch the movement of light across the uneven cobblestones. The residual sunlight, now trapped between the buildings, glows with a muted ochre hue. It illuminates the pattern of wear in the stone, the paths trodden countless times by feet just like yours and those that came before. There is an undeniable rhythm etched into the very geology of the space. Life here moves with the pace set not by urgency or dramatic need, but by the sustainable cycle of human habit, preparation, toil, cleansing, sustenance, and rest. As you head back toward the core warmth of your dwelling, the lingering coolness of the wash basin is a contrast to the deep, enveloping promise of night. The day's minor dramas have been washed away, leaving only the steady, quiet understanding that tomorrow will begin anew, requiring the same gentle rhythm of waking and cleansing. You carry this feeling, the sense of ritual purification and peaceful completion, like a soft weight settling in your bones, allowing you to transition into the deepest kind of rest. The cooler hours have deepened, and the structured tempo of the day begins its gentle slide toward rest. You settle back into the shared space, drawing closer to the source of warmth. The firelight, banked low in the hearth or perhaps cast by a carefully placed oil lamp, paints everything in shades of deep amber and soft gold. This light does not demand attention. It simply exists, providing a steady counterpoint to the surrounding indigo dark. You feel the texture of the earth floor beneath you, cooled slightly by the day's humidity, contrasting softly with the radiant heat that rises from the embers. The air now carries fewer sharp smells, no longer the concentrated scent of market spices or fresh sawdust, but something deeper and softer, the mingled aroma of wood smoke, spent cooking coals, and the clean, warm cotton of sleeping bodies. You sit quietly beside your companion, and together you exist within this small pocket of contained light. The silence is not empty. It is dense, weighted with the accumulated stillness of a community that has successfully completed another rotation around the sun. It settles upon you like a heavy, familiar blanket, comforting in its profound quietude. You observe the way the firelight dances on the rough-hewn stone walls, making every imperfection, the slight crack, the minute patch of wear near a corner, appear momentarily alive, breathing with its own soft rhythm. These are not dramatic moments. They are simply observations of constancy, of matter enduring. The shadows thrown by the low light are gentle giants, stretching and shrinking imperceptibly across the uneven floor, marking time not by hands or clocks, but by the patient cooling of the embers. The sounds that arrive now are minimized, the soft drip of water from an unseen eave, the occasional quiet sigh escaping a nearby sleeper, the almost inaudible whisper of wood settling as it cools. These small auditory anchors pull your attention inward, urging a slowdown. You find yourself noticing the pattern of their breathing, the steady, reliable rise and fall that speaks volumes about effort expended and rest earned. It is an unspoken communion, resting side by side, drawing energy from shared physical proximity. Perhaps conversation drifts towards a simple memory, not a grand narrative but a delicate recalling of detail. Someone mentions the time, many seasons ago, when they used to visit a particular bend in the river, remembering the specific shade of green on the bank or the peculiar kind of bird call that echoed from the reeds at certain times of day. You follow this thread quietly, not trying to add dramatic embellishment, but simply absorbing the texture of their recollection. It is less about the event itself, and more about the way memory selects small, highly vivid sensory details. The coolness of wet stones on bare feet, or the particular tang of riverside mud after a rain. You allow your own mind to gently drift with this quiet current. You think not of what has happened tomorrow, but simply of the journey that brought you here, settled in the shared warmth. This sense of history is not linear. It curls and folds back on itself like threads into a single piece of cloth. Every morning's labor, every afternoon's sweat, every careful act of rinsing away dust and grit, all these moments are woven into the fabric that constitutes your current quiet peace. You observe the hands resting nearby. They belong to people who have worked with wood, kneaded flour, lifted heavy baskets, and walked over uneven stone for long stretches. The lines etched into the palms and knuckles are not mere marks. They are records. Each crease speaks of a specific resistance met, a task completed, a life lived at this geographic point in time. There is an economy of strength evident here, a quiet resilience found in habitual labor. The intimacy of sharing this space is measured by small allowances. The careful placement of an elbow so as not to disturb sleep, the conscious decision to whisper rather than speak, the acknowledgement that even silence requires physical restraint. It is a politics achieved through mutual, unspoken regard. You understand that true comfort in a community is not found in luxurious separation, but in this deep, reliable merging, a quiet acceptance of another's presence. The firelight catches the faint dust motes suspended in the air, making them look like tiny, slow-drifting constellations. They remind you how transient light is, and yet how steady it can be when centered in a shared space. You breathe slowly, matching the measured rhythm around you, letting your breath become a quiet point of focus against the vastness of the night that presses just outside the warmth. You feel the slow turning towards deep repose, not with anticipation, but with a gradual sinking into acceptance. The story, whether told aloud or simply observed in shared stillness, is about continuity. It is about realizing that the cycle of fire needing wood, the cycle of sleep preceding work, the cycle of dusk giving way to dawn, are far more reliable and sustaining than any sudden event. You rest within this current rhythm, letting the warmth soak into your bones, anchored by the shared quietness of the moment. The need for great stories dissolves, replaced by the profound nourishment of simply existing together under the watchful, amber glow of history's steady fire. You settle back, the day's lingering warmth slowly draining away from your limbs. The coolness that drifts through the open doorway is a profound contrast to the slow heat accumulated in the inner rooms over the span of hours. You find yourself lying near the edge of the pallet, close enough that you feel the steady rhythm of breath beside you, but far enough to gather your own stillness. The woven blanket shifts slightly with your settling weight, and the familiar scent of wood smoke clings to it, a sweet, dry smell that speaks of banked fires and distant evening hearths. You lift your head just barely, careful not to disturb the soft mound of sleep beside you. Your gaze drifts upward through the narrow gap between the house and the neighboring roofline. Above, the night is unfurling itself like an enormous, deep indigo sheet pulled taut across the curved dome of the city's skyline. The immediate world, the terracotta tiles, the rough plaster walls, the stacked gourds, is eclipsed by the sheer scale of the heavens. The wood smoke remains, a faint residue in the air that mixes with the cleaner, mineral smell of night dew and cooling earth. It is a scent rooted deep within this place, tethering you to the rhythm of human habitation beneath the indifferent sweep of space. You track your gaze upwards, past the highest smoke plume drifting like an exhausted breath, until the faint shimmer of distant, silent lights begins to speckle the blackness. It takes a moment for the eye to adjust. Everything you know, everything that defined your day's small efforts, the kneading of dough, the scraping wood, the shared coolness of water, feels suddenly contained and insignificant beneath the vast indifference of those distant pinpoints of light. These lights are not flares or momentary sparks. They burn with a quiet, steady persistence, having traveled for unimaginable spans just to rest upon your retinas. You learn to breathe slower now, synchronizing your breath gently with the natural, deep ebb and flow that defines rest. The physical effort of looking up requires tension, but relaxing into the weightlessness of the gaze releases a different kind of calm. You begin to trace patterns in the deeper blackness, searching for those anchors that human eyes recognize across millennia. The constellations appear slowly, as if the night itself is pulling them gently into visibility. First, you notice the discernible arc of Ursa Major, the Great Bear, its familiar cluster of stars forming a recognizable shape against the background wash of greater darkness. The sheer geometrical precision of it is humbling. These are patterns that have remained virtually unchanged for ages, holding their fixed places in the celestial tapestry while below, life unfolds. The quick rise and predictable fall of generations. You consider the antiquity of this view. Your ancestors, before carved stone paths, before the organized market stalls, before even these persistent wooden houses stood here, watched the same slow unfolding show. The sky does not care that you are tired or hungry or successful in your labor today. It simply continues its ancient turning. The realization settles over you with a soft weight, like dust settling on cool stone. Your life, measured out by rising sun and setting smoke-hazed dusk, is incredibly brief when mapped against the sweeping arc of galaxies. Yet within that brevity, there is deep meaning. The sharing of bread, the careful passing in the market, the simple act of helping another lift a heavy bucket. These are your anchors to reality. You shift slightly on the pallet, enjoying the minor scrape of woven fiber against dry skin. Your mind drifts not into worry or vivid memory, but into a kind of soft contemplation about pattern itself. The rising and falling tides, the predictable heat of the midday lull, the slow spiral of woodsmoke upwards, all are simply patterns asserting themselves. The smoke plumes drift higher, catching the faintest starlight which gives them an ethereal, silvery glow that seems to merge with the vastness above. It is a blend of the very local, the cooking fire, and the utterly universal, the night sky. You notice how easily the faint glow of your settlement mixes with the deeper blackness, refusing to be completely swallowed by it, yet simultaneously being contained by its immensity. This blending suggests a persistent rhythm. Life will always emit small plumes of smoke. The stars will always shine across them. The human experience is not separate from the cosmos, but rather an intricate layer draped over its enduring cycle of existence. You focus on slowing your inhale and letting your exhale become unusually long, noticing the slow release of tension through your ribs. You examine one small point of light in particular, a slightly brighter star near the elbow of the Bear constellation. You imagine the immense, silent journey that Speck is undergoing right now. A cool awareness touches you, that all motion, even starlight's steady beaconing, requires profound amounts of time and patience. The thought of deep sleep becomes less a surrender and more an acceptance of this necessary stillness, a participation in the great cycle of rest. You allow your breathing to deepen naturally, letting go of the small measurements of time that worried you during the day. The sounds from the streets are muffled now, reduced to the low murmur of distant nocturnal animals, or perhaps just the soft clink of ceramic pots being settled indoors. The weight of the blanket feels secure and predictable around your shoulders. You realize how much comfort is drawn simply from repetition, the repeated sweep of constellations, the repeated cycle of wood smoke, the repeated gentle breathing beside you. These patterns are not merely signs of continuity, they are soothing assurances. You allow your gaze to glaze over again, no longer straining toward those powerful lights, but letting them drift into a softer blur. The coolness from outside creeps around the edges of the shelter, refreshing and deepening the sleep-inducing quiet. You breathe in the scent of old wood and distant embers, feeling yourself sink deeper and slower, cradled between the earth's cool surface and the immense, steady turning of the night sky overhead. The last sense to fade is the faint memory of movement, the busy day's steps, the rhythm of labor. Now there is only the quiet vastness, pulling you downward into the long, necessary darkness of rest. You feel the gradual shift in weight beside you, a subtle adjustment that pulls you further into the deep cushioning of the bedding. The night has deepened beyond the faint orange glow of memory, settling instead for the steady, absorbent blackness, punctuated only by brief sighs and shifts in breath. You lie perfectly still, acutely aware of the slow, comforting presence radiating from the person beside you. It is a quiet companionship that requires no conversation, only acknowledgement. The air now feels heavier than it did hours ago, thick with the accumulated scents of the day. The faint, lingering sharpness of wood smoke from the cooking hearth, the clean, mineral tang of the shared washing water, and beneath it all, the grounding aroma of warm woolen fibers. You take a slow, quiet breath through your nose, drawing in these familiar smells. Each inhale is an anchoring gesture, pulling you gently back to the safety of this immediate moment. Your mind begins to follow the rhythm of those breaths beside you. It is a steady pattern, rising and falling at a natural pace, a deeply reliable metronome against the overwhelming quiet of deep night. You count these subtle rises and falls, not needing to count them exactly, but merely observing their constancy. This dependable beat becomes the primary texture of your awareness. You notice the way the fabric covers you both. It is one blanket, woven thick with years of use. It has a certain comforting weight to it, a physical boundary that delineates safety and warmth against the chill of the night air that still manages to seep into the stone structure around you. You feel its texture beneath your fingertips if they are visible, imagining the interwoven threads, each one having held off the cold for another passing season. Your awareness drifts back through the hours of the day that have since passed. A moment lingers on the scent of flour dust from the kneading board, momentarily catching in the soft nap of the cloth beside you. You recall the cool shock of water splashing over your hands at the fountain, a sudden jolt of temperature breaking the monotony of tasks. The recollection is gentle, unburdened by any urgency or detail that might tax the mind. It is simply the feeling of those moments, the smooth grain of wood from the carving block in the mid-morning sun, the satisfying, rasping sound of the plane against seasoned timber, a steady, rhythmic work that allows the edges of consciousness to soften and diffuse. You feel the cool weight of your own limbs settling deeper into the bedding. The body begins its natural surrender to exhaustion. Every minor muscle tension from standing, from walking through the crowded market lanes, or from bending over the simple meal, has slowly started to loosen. You notice how the subtle chill of the stone floor beneath the house structure works against the retained warmth of your bodies, creating a perfect equilibrium of comfortable rest. The dark outside is an immense volume of space, far larger than the sheltered confines of your room, and that immensity seems to gently pull at the edges of your awareness. You remember looking up last night, seeing the vast spread of distant, glittering points of light, the stars like scattered rice grains poured across a silent cloth. Their cold permanence contrasts so sharply with the warm, immediate reality of being tucked into bed. This deepens your contemplation on time itself, not as something that rushes past, but as something that settles and folds. You realize that life here is measured by these cycles, from the pre-dawn silence to the market's necessary cacophony, through the quiet focus of work, the midday pause beneath cool shade, and finally, this enveloping curtain of night. Your thoughts grow soft and less defined, like watercolor pigment bleeding into damp paper. They move away from specific memories toward generalized feelings of continuation and belonging. You are part of a rhythm that has existed for generations within these walls, a slow, persistent current of necessary human routine. You become acutely aware of the weightlessness of your thoughts, floating up like soft smoke. The last distinct sensation is the cool comfort emanating from the shared physical closeness. The reliable heat signature beside you, the gentle pressure of the blanket, and the steady, dependable cadence of breathing that promises continuity. You allow yourself to drift further away from active thought, letting the surrounding quiet become not an absence, but a presence in itself. The world outside continues its slow turning, unseen, unheard.